So this has been a very scary week for democracy. As I'm sure you are aware, the United States Supreme Court has set a dangerous new precedent. Any U.S. president is immune from prosecution for crimes committed while acting in their official role as president. After a series of problematic decisions from the court this session, the general immunity of the president is incredibly dangerous, with the real possibility of a vengeful, racist, misogynistic, pathological liar landing in the White House next year. We have deep cause to be concerned. I want you to know that I hear your concern. While I can't make promises that everything's going to be okay, I can say that we all have reason to hope and to act boldly. If you are concerned about American democracy, then you are in exactly the right place. Since the very establishment of this American government, our faith tradition has been building and defending democracy by and for the people. Courageous people of all ages and races, Unitarians, Universalists, and Unitarian Universalists have bolstered this still young experiment of American democracy. They pushed and pleaded, sacrificed, marched, prayed, and preached for freedom, and in many cases they won. They shaped this country that we are so concerned about today. They were driven to action by a deep and abiding faith. It isn't a consistent faith in one singular vision of God. Rather, it's a faith in the capacity for human beings to grow and to learn and to do better. When given the opportunity to thrive in love and trust, we are better together. We believe so much good is possible, and that possibility calls us into bold action. One of the most recent visible impacts of our faith was helping to oust Sheriff Joe Arpaio from Maricopa County in Arizona. After 24 years in office, he lost re-election in 2016. Unitarian Universalists were outspoken opponents of Arpaio's policies, including his notorious tent city, which was basically an open-air prison in the deserts of Arizona, and his targeting people of color. During the UUA 2012 General Assembly in Phoenix, a protest against Arpaio drew 2,000 people chanting and singing outside of the jail. I'm so glad to have been there that night. UU ministers, including Reverend Susan Frederick Gray, were plaintiffs in a federal class action suit against Arpaio, which won an injunction against him, stopping workplace raids targeting people of color. It was our privilege to support and follow Arizona immigrant leaders who shut down Sheriff Joe and his racist regime. Around the country and here in Orange County, we have made this land safer for immigrants. Before being a leading voice for immigration justice, we were on the vanguard of rights for gay, lesbian, and bisexual people. The first documented same-sex wedding conducted by UU ministers were in 1957 and 1958, a decade before Stonewall, at our congregations in Santa Monica and San Francisco. That was the time and place of the very beginning of an organized gay rights movement, and we were there. We ordained our first out gay Unitarian Universalist minister in 1979. Our first openly transgender minister was ordained in 1988. Considering the current debate about trans identity and rights, that is a long, long time ago. The work wasn't just internal. We also helped pave the way for same-sex legal marriage. In May 2004, Arlington Street Church in Boston, Massachusetts was the site of the first state-sanctioned same-sex marriage in the United States. In December 2009, Washington, D.C. Mayor Adrian Fenty signed the bill to legalize same-sex marriage in the District of Columbia in All Souls Unitarian Church in Washington, D.C. And the UUA submitted a friend of the court brief in support of same-sex marriage for the Supreme Court case that eventually legalized marriage nationwide. From the very beginning of the movement, we declared that love is love and our trans siblings are whole and holy. Around the time we started ordaining gay ministers, we were making tremendous risks exposing military lies about the Vietnam War. In 1971, the Beacon Press, owned by our denomination, published the Pentagon Papers. This is a lesser-known story. Due to his placement on a special project to review the war, Daniel Ellsberg gained access to a full history of the decision-making for the Vietnam War from 1940 to 1968. Disgusted by what he found, Ellsberg smuggled the document out. A couple of newspapers published small sections of the document, but were immediately ensnared in legal battles. Eventually, the papers found their way to U.S. Senator Mike Gravel, one of two UU senators at the time. His plan was to read the papers into public record during a filibuster at a committee meeting, but for that to be effective, he needed a publisher willing to actually print the material once it was said out loud. Dozens of commercial and academic publishers refused, so he turned to his UU faith. Beacon Press, our publishing house, agreed to publish the papers in their entirety. The Pentagon Papers revealed that the United States had expanded its war with the bombing of Cambodia and Laos, coastal raids in North Vietnam, and Marine Corps attacks, none of which had been reported to the American public at that time. In printing the Pentagon Papers, the Beacon Press and the UUA found themselves in the crosshairs of President Nixon and Hoover's FBI. The ensuing legal battles nearly bankrupted us until Watergate distracted them. We risked everything for our commitment to seeking truth and democratic decision-making. Just 5 years earlier, we were helping stir up good trouble in Selma, following the call from Dr. King and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. On February 18, 1965, during a protest, 26-year-old Baptist deacon Jimmy Lee Jackson was shot by police as he tried to protect his grandfather from their beating. After he died, communities erupted in grief and anger, and a march to the state capitol, Montgomery, was called to protest police violence and demand voting rights. More than 500 people came to the march that day. As they approached the Edmund Pettus Bridge just outside of Selma, state troopers arrived and told marchers to turn back. When they did not, you all know this story. When they refused, the troopers attacked with nightsticks, tear gas, and mounted divisions charged into the crowd with horses. The images shocked the nation. The event has since become known as Bloody Sunday. King immediately planned a second march, calling clergy and others from around the country. 2,500 people came to march on March 9th. Among them were hundreds of Unitarian ministers. But again, they only reached the bridge that day. That night after the attempted march, UU ministers James Reeb, Clark Olson, and Orloff Miller had dinner at an integrated restaurant, a fairly unusual thing in that town. As they were leaving, they were targeted as outsider civil rights marchers by local men who attacked the ministers with clubs. Reverend James Reeb's skull was cracked with a direct blow, and he died later. The death of a white minister brought national outrage among other whites that Jimmy Lee Jackson's death had not inspired. Protests were held around the country. In response to the death, the march, and years of pressure, Lyndon Johnson introduced the Voting Rights Act to Congress on March 15, 1965. That march still had not yet happened. On March 21st, tens of thousands of marchers came to Selma for the 5-day, 4-night trek to the state capitol. They didn't all march the whole way. Some marchers walked, while others were transported by volunteer drivers, including Unitarian Universalist volunteer Viola Liuzzo. Liuzzo was a white woman, a mother of 5, a new member of her UU congregation in Detroit. The night of the final march, Viola was driving an African-American activist to Montgomery when a car full of Klan members started following them and shouting threats. She sang freedom songs in response, I am told. Miles farther, on an empty stretch of road, the Klan members pulled up and shot Viola through the window, killing her. Her death brought a fresh wave of outrage. National response grew as television broadcasts showed the marchers' determination and the power of Dr. King's speech when the marchers arrived in Montgomery. Months later, on August 6th, the Voting Acts Right was passed. Again, we were not leaders of this cause, but we gave all we had to support the change needed to save this country. During the 1950s, just before that, the center of resistance to McCarthyism in Los Angeles was at First Unitarian Church. Then, under the leadership of Reverend Stephen Fritchman, you might hear that name come up from time to time. The real lasting legacy came from the congregation. On February 21st, 1954, the congregation voted to refuse to sign a loyalty oath. That year, California had passed the Levering Act that required all nonprofits to sign a loyalty oath along with their tax documents. Refusal to sign the oath would mean that churches and any of their donors would forego the benefits of nonprofit status. The Levering Act went beyond nonprofit organizations, though. It also required all state employees to sign the oath, specifically disavowing radical beliefs. It was aimed particularly at employees of the University of California, many of whom lost their jobs. Church leaders believed this pressure to be a violation of the First Amendment, which guaranteed free speech and separation of church and state. They released a press statement saying, quote, "While Unitarians yield to none in the degree of their loyalty to this country, they also yield to none in their determination to protect religious, philosophical, and political freedom for every American." The church then sued the County of Los Angeles. 4 years later, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of First Church in a 7-1 decision, invalidating the loyalty oath, bolstering freedom of speech, and striking a major blow to McCarthy-era repression in California. Winding the clock back a little bit farther, in 1920, At the age of 85, Olympia Brown was one of the few original suffragists who lived to vote in the 1920 presidential election. Her tenacious story is a testament to the wisdom and grit of Unitarian Universalist women in America. Her life was a constant battle with her church and her country. Born in 1853, Olympia Brown was fully ordained as a Universalist minister, making her the first woman to achieve full ministerial standing by any American denomination. In 1870, Brown was called to serve the Universalist Church in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Although the church improved under her leadership, a fraction opposed her ministry. They even opposed her advocacy for women's rights to vote. She was forced out, but then moved to the Universalist Church of the Good Shepherd in Racine, Wisconsin, of all places, where she stayed for 9 years of successful ministry. But she retired from the pulpit to be Susan B. Anthony's right-hand woman in the work for women's suffrage. As you know, Susan B. Anthony, a Quaker and a Unitarian, was extremely influential in the women's suffrage movement. She began writing to Olympia Brown to recruit her talent for the women's rights movement. But slowly, a deep friendship grew out of their common concern. As the cause took a prominent place in her heart, Olympia Brown eventually left her congregation to be a full-time activist. In the intimate letters between these two, one can clearly read a web of sisterhood that made the struggle for women's suffrage the success that it was. Friendship like this, I imagine, must be responsible for a tremendous portion of human development. This particular friendship, and many like it, wove themselves together among liberal religious communities. By 1920, there were 88 Universalist women ministers, the largest group in the United States. Today, well over half of our clergy are women. Even before that, we shaped America by promoting public education. Massachusetts established the first statewide compulsory school system in 1852, following the influence of Unitarian reformer and statesman Horace Mann. After graduating from Brown University and Lichfield Law School, Mann joined First Parish Unitarian Church in Dedham, Massachusetts in 1823. And lest anyone doubt Horace Mann's Unitarian heritage, his very first legal case was representing First Parish of Milton and their removal of their minister, who refused to participate in the custom of inviting guest speakers into his pulpit. When he was elected to act as the secretary of the newly created Massachusetts Board of Education in 1837, Horace Mann spearheaded the common school movement, ensuring that every child could receive a basic education funded by local taxes. His influence quickly spread to the whole country at that time. His commitment to public education sprang from his belief that political stability and social harmony depended on education. He believed that public schooling was central to good citizenship, democratic participation, and societal well-being. He advocated for children in public schools learning the ethical principles common across Christianity, but not those doctrines about which different sects disagreed. Around the same time, in 1849, Henry David Thoreau's essay, Civil Disobedience, was published. In 1843, Thoreau refused to pay his taxes in protest of slavery and the Mexican-American War. The fruit of that night in jail was his essay titled Civil Disobedience. It's one of the most influential pieces of political writing ever. A very quick summary of his argument in Civil Disobedience is, government is a machine for corruption. It's the responsibility of individuals of conscience to resist that machine by refusing to cooperate. Our refusal to cooperate is good and creates change in the world. Since it was published, Civil Disobedience has been used around the world as a blueprint for nonviolent social action. Leo Tolstoy, the Russian author and social leader, was deeply impacted, even arranging for the essay to be translated and published in Russian. Mahatma Gandhi read Civil Disobedience in 1906, early in his career. He later said, quote, "Thoreau's ideas influenced me greatly. I adopted some of them and recommend the study of Thoreau to all my friends. Why, I actually took the name of my movement from Thoreau's essay." Civil in the title is not a synonym for polite, kind, or socially acceptable. It's about government. Thoreau had little interest in conforming to socially acceptable ways of living. Civil here just refers to government. The essay is a treatise on when and how people of conscience are responsible for defying the laws of their own government. Because democracy alone is unable to steer government toward justice. It rests on the conscience of each individual within society to leverage his or her own deeper wisdom. Our influence on American democracy goes back to the separation of church and state, actually before it. John Murray, hopefully you recognize that name, often called the father of American Universalism, was serving as the minister of the new independent Christian church in Gloucester, Massachusetts. Before the Bill of Rights was added to the U.S. Constitution, communities in Massachusetts had established churches that were supported by taxation. Everyone paid their taxes to this religious organization. But as dissenters from the established church, the members of the independent Christian church, the Universalists, were vilified and harassed. They refused to pay taxes to support First Parish, and the townspeople responded by breaking into their homes, seizing their personal property as payment for their unpaid taxes. In 1786, the Universalist congregants sued and won a landmark ruling that they could not be taxed to support a church to which they did not belong. To be clear, they were not the only congregation who stood up and refused to be taxed, but they were certainly among them. This ruling predated the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution by 5 years. We, Unitarians, Universalists, and Unitarian Universalists have been ushering in more democratic America from the very beginning. We embrace the radical idea that people are generally good. We believe that given the opportunity, given the information, reasonable and compassionate people will make good decisions for themselves and their community. We believe that this is the true order of the universe. The sacred is here among us in our everyday. God didn't make rules 2,000 years ago for all people forever and ever. Amen. Or appoint a few powerful people to rule over the rest. Our innate ability to reason and to care for one another is a gift of the universe, and it is our responsibility to use that gift together, to figure out how to live and share and grow. So I cannot promise you that American democracy is absolutely secured, because it never has been. We are invited into a long, long lineage of courageous, faithful people who call us to keep up their banner today in our time. As the First Unitarian Church of LA said in their refusal to sign a loyalty oath, while Unitarians yield to none in the degree of their loyalty to this country, they also yield to none in their determination to protect religious, philosophical, and political freedom for every American. Amen.